Lovers of lore, thank you for joining me for the 5th installment of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan story. This part of the story starts with Quintorius, Huatli, and Weta. Huatli and Weta were riding bats while Quintorius pondered what it would be like to touch the inner sun. Huatli and Weta were riding the bats to claim some cosmium from the distant cosmic reef, while Quintorius conferred with the steward Akal. Akal suggested that she should send one of their didacs to teach Quintorius the meaning behind their culture in exchange for learning about Strixhaven and Quintorius's world. Quint was hopeful that he could learn more about the Coin Empire this way. The Bat Riders returned. Huatli was pleased with the chunk of cosmium she had obtained. This was considered a rite of passage here. She showed it off and spoke of making it into a necklace. Weta was not sharing Huatli's enthusiasm, however. She had spotted vampiric fog on the horizon. 2 prisoners were brought before the steward. It turned out to be Kellen and Amalia. They explained that they sought help stopping the vampires who were seeking to find Alcazats. Akal looked grim. Some of the Oltec still worship the betrayer, and they may know his location. If the vampires get this knowledge and free Alcazats, it will spell doom for us all. The story then switches to Malcolm. He's deep in the bottom of the mines and surrounded by fungal infected townsfolk. The myco-tyrant who controlled them said it was done with talking. It would take Malcolm by force and use him to leave this place. Malcolm considered whether he could grab Breeches and fly out of this cavern, but opted instead for a different plan. He told Breeches to cover his ears and started to sing. The effect was immediate. The myco-tyrant closed its eyes, and the fungal townsfolk stood immobile. Malcolm and Breeches made a break for it, Breeches holding his ears the entire time, while Malcolm kept singing until finally, when they were far enough away, a many-voiced yell of rage let him know his siren's magic was no longer working. Malcolm stopped singing, and the 2 began to run. Fungus chased them down the tunnel, but Malcolm could sense water and magic ahead. He came to a cliff's edge that overlooked an underground ocean that housed a River Herald community. Malcolm leapt off the cliff, yelling a warning. A moment later, the myco-tyrant's forces came boiling out after him. Townsfolk, dinosaurs, cat people, all infected, tumbled off of the cliff and into the water. Giant fungal-coated bats flew bulkily in the sky. The River Herald's response was swift. Jade weaponry was readied. Defensive spells were cast. Primal elementals were invoked, swirling into being, ready to fight the fungal invaders. In the chaos, Nakanzel the River Herald interrogated Malcolm. "What doom have you brought upon us?" Malcolm huffed. "It calls itself the myco-tyrant and makes people into fungal slaves." Nakanzel was concerned. "We need to warn our people on the other side of the golden door." Malcolm volunteered to be the messenger. Anywhere was better than here. The story then switches to Vito. He can hear the voice of Alcazats. He kept his men hidden in a vampiric cloud of fog as they escaped captivity. A red glow appeared in the fog. A voice said, "I've been sent to guide you." Vito didn't consider for a second. Lead on. The red glow came from a crystal, and soon more crystal bearers joined them. These were the followers of Alcazats, and there were more of them than Vito would have expected. He ended up with a mob of people escorting him. Some even brought human sacrifices. They were excited about Alcazats finally being freed from his prison. This gave Vito pause. He didn't realize that the Bat God was trapped. He had only thought of glory. They traveled onwards, for what felt like an eternity, and then they came to a cave. In that cave, there was a curious door covered in symbols with a giant hole in the middle. His guide pulled out a chunk of cosmium and handed it to Vito. You'll be found worthy or destroyed. This is the key. Vito stepped forth and fearlessly stuck his arm through the hole in the door. The door clamped down on his arm, the crystal glowed, and Vito's mind burst with pain. All the power he had gained from feeding on the servants was gone, drawn out of him. His legs almost gave out, but he gritted his teeth and endured. The pain stopped and the door opened. A huge swarm of bats flew out, heralding their arrival. "Come to me!" again came the voice of the bat god. Vito entered and laid eyes on Alcazotz. The bat god wore a collar of skulls as well as a black and gold crown. He was bound by great golden chains inlaid with cosmium. Vito knelt before his god. "The end of the fifth age is nigh. The sun will be extinguished and darkness will reign." After Alcazotz made those proclamations, the sacrifices were brought forth and fed to the bat god one by one. Alcazotz strained at his bonds, and the golden chains started to give, their pink cosmium turning blood red. It didn't take long for the bat god to burst free. Golden shrapnel sprayed around him as the links burst. Once again, Vito heard Alcazotz say, "Come to me." He moved over to the bat god and knelt before him enraptured. The bat god plunged his fangs into Vito. Vito's body erupted in intense pain. His bones broke and his body reformed. Around him, he could hear others receiving the bat god's blessing. Vito's body had changed. His fangs were longer, his hands were claws, and he had sprouted big bat-like wings. All around him, transformed vampires and cultists stood staring at their new forms. Alcazotz leapt into the air, and everyone followed at his command. He flew up to the sun Chimmel and landed upon it. Spreading his wings as wide as he could, he started to gather his power, and once he started to pull his wings back in, the metal that drifted around Chimmel started to form into a sphere around it. The bat god was imprisoning the sun. The lands below got darker and darker, but Alcazotz didn't have enough power to finish the ritual. He collapsed, and Vito came rushing up. "More sacrifices!" Vito commanded. His troops moved out to fulfill his command. The story then switches back to Wada. She was fearful due to the darkness. Was it day or night? She had no idea. It was uncomfortably similar to the Phyrexian invasion. Huatli reassured her everything would be okay. The Oltec mounted up to stop the bat god's forces from imprisoning the sun and flew towards their enemies. The vampire bat hybrids met them head on in aerial battle. Wada noticed someone else had just flown through the golden entrance of Inner Ixalan. Were they reinforcements for the vampires? She realized it was a siren, and hot on the siren's heels was an entire fungal army. Malcolm flew up to Wada, the only face that he recognized. Wada explained about the vampires, and Malcolm told her about the Mycotyrant. Could it possibly infect a god? The story then switches over to Vito in his full glory. He was laying waste to bat riders with his new powerful form. His sacrifices to Alcazotz were helping the god to finish imprisoning the sun. The Imperial officer Inti rose up to challenge Vito. Bearing the light of the threefold sun, he managed to drive Vito back. But the moment was short-lived. Vito drove his lance into the skull of Inti's bat, and Inti fell from the sky. Huatli saw this from a distance, watched her cousin fall, and dove after him. Vito decided that Huatli would be a perfect sacrifice and descended after her. And that ends this installment of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan story. I hope you enjoyed it, my friends. If you like what we're doing here, support the channel by joining our Patreon or the channel membership. Big shout out to the channel's patrons and members. Thank you very much for supporting our work. We'll have the next part of the story ready tomorrow. In the meantime, go enjoy some more lore on this channel, because remember, my friends, lore is life.